So some enormous Necron points reveals today. Looks like we've got dirt cheap Lichguard, Catan not going up at all despite gaining that amazing 5+ feel no pain save, Warriors down at 10, and plenty more. Let's go through each unit in the Codex, all the enhancements, how many points they cost, and how they changed in the new Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Necrons, and in this video I thought I'd go through the new and updated Munitorum field manual points section, which is now finally updated so we know the points cost for each and every Necron unit and how they're going to be playing in game. I must admit it's perhaps a bit frustrating being able to know the rules but not the points cost, but now we can truly start to put things together, and some things are looking very interesting I think. Basically the update for the Munitorum field manual is now live. As expected, the points changes are quite different to the ones in the Codex, though as expected there are quite a few trends in the Codex that did stick to the field manual, say things like the Canoptech Reanimator going down in cost given its drastically reduced abilities. As we know, we've lost a few datasheets, so we no longer have points cost for Amrakir, Vargard Oberon, Nemensor Zandrek or the Necron Lord, though we did gain the new one for the Translocation Shroud. For the most part, the majority of points costs have stayed the same at their pre-codex level, though a hefty chunk of them have changed, most of them going down a little bit, a few of them going up, though usually the ones that went up did gain some sort of ability as a boost to them. Even the ones that stayed the same are sometimes kind of interesting though, lots of units really shifted around in their role in the new book and have some pretty interesting and cool combos that make them a lot more interesting now. In this video, with that in mind, I thought we'd talk through each and every Necron datasheet in turn, how much it changed, and what the rules changes were from the index to the codex, and briefly talk about their role in the army now. We'll do each of the datasheets in turn, then get on to the enhancements, as they were quite interesting given that we didn't have any points cost for them up to now. First up, let's start with the squads, and none other than the Necron Warriors. They did get the same change as the ones that went down in the codex points. They're now 10 points per model, so a fairly generous drop of 9%, though admittedly they lost some very big abilities in the codex, namely the Gauss Reapers being reduced to strength 4 for less threat, and far more importantly, their number is Legion now doesn't give you a big D3+3 regenerated models on objectives, you just re-roll the dice for reanimation, which is just ridiculously less powerful. I feel like at 10 points they're still playable, but just less exciting. You do get lots of points worth of objective control, and they can still be pretty tanky with Cryptex, but overall I sort of feel like 10 points is where they're okay but not standout. Probably not going to be taken as much in the most home competitive list, and I feel that people aren't generally going to be building around them quite as much. Immortals remain the same at 70 points per 5, their only major codex change was the Tesla gaining plus 6-inch range to 24, which admittedly was quite a buff for that gun. I did make an entire video on the Immortals earlier in the week. Just about every detachment can make them pretty interesting for 4-hit rerolls combined with exploding hits on a 5. Really quite nice with the Plasmancer, particularly given his boosted profile. And in the Canoptech Court, they're kind of amazing, with that devastating wound stratagem just being able to blast out ridiculous amounts of those each turn. Feel like even if they've stayed the same points cost, they have kind of gone up in the world. Lichguard are a unit that a lot of Necron players were sort of bemoaning the changes to. Basically, old-style index Necrons involved usually just getting a couple of big blocks of these and just maximally supporting them with reanimation boosts, and between everything it doesn't look like that's going to be the best play anymore. On the plus side though, they did get an absolutely whopping points cut as a result, not quite the very best in the codex, but nearly, dropping all the way down from 23 points per model to 17 points per model, really not bad for a 2-wound miniature with a 4+ invulnerable save, toughness 5 and -1 to wounds. They can't be joined by Cryptex or Cryptothrals anymore, so in general their durability has gone way down, and their -1 to wound roll only applies if their strength is greater than the model's toughness, as it does for quite a few other units in 40k. It's still going to be powerful against heavier fire. Overall that does feel like a pretty appropriate points drop, it really is pretty massive. For 17 points they're very durable models with that invulnerable save. I kind of wonder if it might make people take a second look at the War Scythe profile for them. Getting that cheap does mean that they actually could be a bit more credible in terms of damage dealers, as opposed to just a big tanky brick. Overall I quite like the change for them. I'm glad that Games Workshop has managed to keep them at least somewhat interesting. Next up, the Triarch Praetorians are unchanged, 120 points for 5 jump pack boys. The particle weapons no longer hit on a ballistic skill 2+, they now hit on 3s, but they did gain a little pip of movement from 10 inches from 9. Basically if you liked them before, you'd probably like them now I guess. Death Marks remain 65 points per 5. They didn't get any changes before from the codex, though I thought they were fairly usable already. Nice cheap little squads to drop for secondaries. and in particular they feel like they might enjoy the hypercrypts being able to warp around the board at will and still put out a little bit of ranged firepower. Flayed ones remain 70 points per 5 and no changes there. They're still a somewhat pricey damage dealer to put in the midfield, not very tough for the cost but can blend enemy infantry quite nicely. I suppose things from the Annihilation Legion could help them out if you were choosing to run that one. Cryptothralls are 60 points and unchanged. They took a bunch of index changes, losing their 4+ feel no pain but gaining +1 wounds to 3 wounds each. Overall that is a durability nerf really though, and reanimating each individual wound is just a little bit less impressive. Overall I feel like that's a big blow. I feel like they could have gone down a bit given the changes there. Basically if you want extra wounds in your unit it's going to cost you a heck of a lot now. Tomblade's got a whole raft of changes and they dropped very slightly, going down from 80 to 75 points, a 6% decrease. Their particle weapons also hit on a 3+ rather than a 2. The shield veins are now a trade-off. You either get the 3+ save and drop your movement to 8 inches, or keep the good 12-inch move and keep a 4+ save instead. Shadow Looms now grant stealth for a -1 to hit at range and not a 5+ invulnerable save, and they lost their innate -1 to hit rule for a move shoot move rule. Overall, perhaps a fair few side grades there. They're going to be a lot easier to kill per model I think now. But move shoot move is really quite big for skirmishing, should mean that they have a lot more flexibility for tucking in to do objectives and things like that, or reaching parts of the board to do secondaries. Canoptech Wraiths are looking like one of the most exciting units in the Codex, 110 points per 3. They've not changed at all for their vastly increased abilities, and the Technomancers can give them a 5+ feel no pain. The Particle Casters dropped from their ballistic skill of 2+ to a 4+, but still overall remain a badly balanced weapon, and you should basically always take their Particle Beamers over the damage 3 gun that they get. Their movement was boosted from a 10 inches from 9 inches, and they're now 4 wounds, which is another huge change from 3. Between that and the Technomancer, they get back to being really quite a tough unit once more, and are really quite nice to have on the front line scrapping with enemy objective takers. I'm sure they'll be seeing a lot of play, and particularly in Canoptech Court. The Scarab Swarms are 40 points or 80 points and unchanged. They had a few small changes, becoming OC1 when they're near a crypt tech, a slightly boosted movement, and a slightly nerfed self-destruct special rule, only getting 3 wounds on a 6, not a massive D3+3. Still solid for cheap units to run around doing secondaries I think. Locust Destroyers stayed the same at 30 points. They get the full reroll hit rolls against enemy units that are closest on objective markers now. Really quite nice with Gauss when fishing for the lethal hits, and more so with a Locust Lord on tow. Again, they got a little bit faster, going from 8 to 7, and broadly the Codex has boosted them a bit. Locust Heavies similarly remain unchanged, 50 points for that enormous anti-tank Gauss shot or a flurry of the Enmitic fire. They also move just a tiny bit faster, and the Enmitic Exterminator now reroll wound rolls of 1 against anything that isn't a monster or vehicle, so not just infantry, so a small boost to that there against bikes and things. They look like they remain solid firepower for the cost, could be fun in the hypercrypts to keep on warping around the board. Scorpec Destroyers are 100 points per 3 or 200 per 6. They gained a little bit of movement, which is great for a dedicated melee unit. Occasionally that will be the difference between a passed or failed charge. They traded out their Ignores Modifier rule for a much better damage boost on the charge. They reroll ones all the time or reroll everything when they're charging in. That's actually a serious boost to their damage output and makes them a lot more credible in my opinion. A big boost compared with Ignores Modifiers I think. Ophidian Destroyers remain 100. Again they gained a little bit faster but no other major changes. They're perhaps most useful for just burrowing on and off the board to jump around to do secondary objectives, though I do think that at 100 points they are pretty pricey for that role, particularly as they don't have lone operative and can be directly shot. If they do manage to turn up somewhere and can't be shot though, they can skirmish pretty well with enemy lighter infantry, but are nowhere near as general purpose as the Scorpex. The Annihilation Barge is 115 points, so unchanged there. It gets a 10-inch move from 9. Broadly pretty similar for some spammed Tesla fire with AP 0 and damage 2. The Doomsday Arc got a little bit cheaper, dropping down from 210 points to 200, so a 5% points cut there. Overall this guy's got a little bit stronger, and I think he was at least reasonable enough before. The main gun got boosted to a big strength 18, which will be relevant against certain things like toughness 8 and toughness 9. Getting a little bit faster certainly doesn't hurt, and the points cut will be welcome. These are still looking like pretty intimidating threats to have in the backfield, kind of hard to take out, and got some good anti-infantry defense too. The Triarch Stalker remains 125 points. This one actually lost a little movement, going from 9 inches down to 8, but it did gain a scout move of 8 inches for some redeploys before the game begins, and I feel like the heavy Gauss cannon now became perhaps one of the most interesting weapons for it. 6 shots at strength 8, AP2 and damage 2 at 24 inches, at least fairly nice general purpose firepower when it marks targets for stripping cover. Still feels like a bit of a weird unit overall. The scout move is a bit odd, as I feel like it's maybe not the unit that you most want on the front lines. I suppose forcing the opponent to have to deal with it rather than just ignore it might not be the worst though. The Doomstalker is 135 and unchanged. I guess that means that the Doomsday Arc did catch up on it a bit there. This one got a tiny bit faster, and it will absolutely love the Canoptek Court detachment. Full hit rerolls basically for free, provided you can maintain the power matrix. It's really going to send this thing to the next level. The Canoptek Reanimator's reanimation buff range dropped to 3 inches, but it dropped from a massive 105 points down to 75, and that's taken it from being really quite fragile for the cost to actually genuinely quite durable for the cost when you take into account its feel no pain. Big stacking reanimation doesn't look like it's going to be as much of a thing in the Necron army, but honestly I feel like the internet is maybe underestimating this in the context of the points cut. It's still pretty durable to shoot, and if you can't kill it, it's probably going to regenerate up to full health, and could easily still support multiple units in the battle line. It's just going to actually have to go with its charges and not hide anymore. I still say it's certainly not looking at auto-include good. I just rank it a bit more mid-tier as opposed to absolutely worst unit in the Codex, as some people seem to be saying. Next up, the Canoptek Spider is 75 points or 150 for 2. Unchanged here, and an interesting enough support piece, just a little bit fragile for the cost here. The Gloom Prism shifted to a 5+ feel no pain against psychic and mortal wounds from just being a 4+ against psychic only. I feel like that's not too bad as being a bit more general purpose, and it still does its other various support things for scarabs and vehicles. Probably not one to go too heavy on, though its damage output does genuinely get fairly savage in Canoptek Court, as just about any Canoptek thing does. The Ghost Arc's 125 points and unchanged here. This guy has been nerfed on multiple fronts though. The Repaired Barge rule only activates once per turn, not per phase now, and it also suffers really quite hard from Necron warriors not reanimating D3+3 wounds as they used to, which was really quite big. Still could be okay to deposit a bunch of warriors on the midfield objective plus a character, but given that they've declined in value quite so much, I feel like there's going to be less argument for this guy. The Doomscythe has seen a very minimal increase, going up to 230 points from 225. I guess perhaps that might be to represent its stand firm or duck for cover special rule now applying to all units, not just infantry. I did quite like that change though, given that it's going to be firing against tanks and heavies more than infantry, so it seems kind of appropriate. The Tesla weapon also got strength 8 from strength 7, which is nice enough, maybe a little bit more reliable against things like Space Marines I suppose. It is still very, very costly, and particularly so for its defensive profile though. I feel like the vast majority of lists are going to take one of the Locust Heavy Destroyers or the Canoptek Doomstalker or Doomsday Arc if they do want some anti-tank. The Nightside is 145 points and unchanged. This guy can now enter the game from reserves on anything from round 1 to 3, which I guess in theory could make it a little bit more interesting. I guess at least it could threaten to drop a squad round 2 though, rather than having to wait all the way to round 3, which was kind of ridiculously bad. Its Tesla Destructor also got a little bit better, though I still feel that you're probably going to be better off with something else to deliver your squads to game. Just feels like you're paying too much of a premium to deliver things turn 2, whereas I feel like this thing really should be paying for a turn 1 delivery if that was what you were going for. The Monolith is 350 points and unchanged. That one gained movement 8 from 7, so is a little bit faster, and it got a bit of a durability side grade, toughness dropping down to 13, but going up to 22 wounds. I'd say that against the majority of weapons in the game, that's usually going to mean that the Monolith is just very slightly tougher overall, though maybe not loads in it. I feel like it was solid enough before, and it's solid enough now. Some small boost overall. Should be quite good fun to run as the linchpin of Hypercrypt Legion, I guess, if you have one, but just fairly usable full stop, I think. The Obelisk is 325 points and unchanged. This one got similar changes to the Monolith, going down to toughness 13 for more wounds, but it's got the boosted movement as well. Games Workshop did give this a buff in that it slows units quite a lot better now. Previously it had one of those -2 to move, advance and charge rules, where now it halves the movement on all of them, which is usually going to be a fair bit more powerful. It's still going to remain a bit sad not really being any threats to anything much besides lighter infantry with those Tesla things. I suspect you're almost certainly still going to be better off with a Monolith or a Tesseract Vault, though the disruption to the move could genuinely cause problems for some opponents. Its counterpart, the Tesseract Vault, is 400 points, so that got a relatively big increase from 375. a plus 7% there, and did get similar sort of changes going up to movement 8 and up to 24 wounds from 22, though it didn't get any toughness change as it was already T12. The reason for the points increase will be now that it uses 2 of the Catan powers, not 1. I'd say overall that is worth the 25 points. It basically gained either a big general purpose shooting attack, a massive heavy flamer, or an anti-character sniping bullet, depending on which one you wanted. Again, I'd probably overall rate it slightly improved as before, despite the increase. The Convergence of Dominion seems like it's also massively improved. It's dropped down to just 60 points per one of these Menhirs, and it's got a slightly more useful buff as well, giving you a 6+ feel no pain for infantry within 6 inches of it. Potentially a fairly cheap little way just to add a little bit more durability to units that can remain close to it. I guess could be interesting enough for things like Lich Guard, though they might want to move on and past it. Otherwise, it's a toughness 9 and 7 wound fortification, which is a big decrease in durability, though maybe that's for the best if it gets cheaper. And they can be now taken in units of 1 to 3 rather than having to commit to a slightly ridiculous 255 points for the entire 3 of them, which realistically was never going to be a good idea in an army list unless you wanted just some cool Necron terrain on the table. Still feel like they'll overall not really do too much though. Could be worth it if you had a big foot slogging horde though, I guess. I feel like some of the biggest winners of the book are the Catan shards, which managed to stay the same, and this is really quite a big thing given that they all gained a 5+ feel no pain, which is a pretty massive durability boost on top of their halving damage. These things are just going to be monstrous to try and take out now, and each wound restored by reanimation protocols is going to be a massive slog for the enemy to get back, so getting that with no points changes to the Deceiver, Nightbringer and Void Dragon is all amazing, even if they did lose 1 inch of movement just down to 6 inches. Otherwise, the Transcendent Catan can't take enhancements anymore, which does mean that it's not going to be taking that Sempiternal Weave, though it did drop in points from 300 down to 275. I feel like overall it's probably still a little bit worse off after that, given that the 4+ Feel No Pain was even more godly, but at least it is cheaper and you still get some Feel No Pain save. The Nightbringer seems to be the single most improved as well, as it went from damage d6 to a huge damage d6 plus 2 on its scythe attack. This makes it a lot more monstrous against enemy heavy hitters, and I feel like it's going to be a very tempting model to play. The movement decrease does suck a bit, but overall it is only 1 inch difference, and I feel like for the absolutely monstrous power boost that these guys got, you're probably going to be coming out ahead anyway. Lastly, for the other characters, the Silent King was 420 points, unchanged in points, but got a bunch of small side grades with rules. He moves 8 inches, though he no longer has fly. They reprinted that his Menhirs don't go nuclear when they die with the option for a d6+3 deadly demise. That's just Zarek himself with his enslaved star god. His cancel Battleshock rule maybe got a little bit worse and just changed to an aura of +1 leadership, which I think isn't quite as reliable for Necrons nearby. Though 2 of his auras got better, the Favor of Stars seems like the best one to go for. That's now changed to reroll 1s to hit and wound both at range and in melee, which is pretty powerful as it affects his own melee attacks as well. That one seems like the one to go for unless you're doing other very specific things. The Favor of Blades now gives you +1 strength as well as reroll charges. For the damage boost, the reroll 1s and to hit and wound is going to be far better than that. But I guess if you're really scared about failing a long charge, then it could still be the right choice situationally. Overall, I'd say broadly slightly improved with the improvements to melee buffs for his aura. It does make him a little bit more threatening. For the other nobles, all those are unchanged. The Overlord with the Translocation Shroud is confirmed to be 85 points, as was printed in the Codex. That puts him as just the same price as the regular Overlord, so it's probably the one to go for the majority of units that you might want to lead. He does get a Resurrection Orb, and a 6-inch advance is very nice, particularly with Immortal's Tesla. Resurrection Orbs were changed to a single reanimation of d6 wounds, which is probably worse overall, but there is some advantage to front-loading quite a lot of wounds restored. If your unit only has the one chance to reanimate, and otherwise they were about to get wiped, then this could actually be stronger than the old orbs, and it can trigger at the end of any phase, so you could potentially have it go off in between the shooting and the fight phase. Otherwise, for minor changes here, the Catacomb Command Barge went up from 9 inches to 10, so a little faster. The Royal Warden I think got a better rule in fallback shoot and charge. That means that he's quite a nice choice just to keep things like Immortals in combat and firing. Quite nice for warriors as well, which might be on the midfield objectives and likely getting locked up in combat. It means that you should be able to fall back a little bit and then hit the enemy with a bunch of those Gauss Reapers, even if they are strength 4 now. And Imitek the Stormlord with his fancy new model still generates you the command points, but also got +1 wound. Not really the biggest change overall, but once in a blue moon it might save him from living and dying. Kind of a shame that nothing changed for Trazen the Infinite. I feel like he either needed a rules boost or a points drop. For the Destroyer characters, the Scorpet Lord and the Locust Lord both remain the same. The Scorpet Lord got a slightly boosted profile and +1 wound and +1 to the move. I think he also has got a lot more relevance given that the Destroyers will reroll all hit rolls on the charge, means that you can fish for lethal hits on things that you're struggling to wound. It does make his own damage output a little bit better as well. The Locust Lord gets the Resurrection Orb change, and a +1 movement to 8 inches to keep up with the regular Locust Destroyers, and again he'll quite like the full hit rerolls that his unit can threaten now, particularly as he can get critical hits on a 5+. Could have a lot of Destroyers triggering their lethal hits pretty easily with him. The Hex Mark is now 70 points down from 80, so he has got cheaper but he also got worse. Previously he could just keep on blazing away with those pistols each time his nearby unit was shot, but now he can only do that once per turn, so you can't just have him repeatedly firing into a close enemy unit, which I guess kind of does make sense, but definitely makes him weaker. His pistols got a bit of a side grade, swapping precision for ignores cover. I'd say in general ignores cover is going to be a little bit more useful. With just damage 1 attacks, he was rarely going to be taking out an enemy character anyway. He did get a little bit faster as well. Overall, the changes to the multi-threat eliminator I think make him a much worse unit overall, and particularly as he does need to target the unit that actually did the shooting as well, which is another big change. Still usable though, but going to be a lot more niche, more just as a fun Necron lone operative, maybe for secondary type things, or maybe bearing enhancements like that Sovereign Coronal, which will still do very well. The various flavours of durability boosting Cryptek and the Plasmancer all stayed exactly the same. Kind of fine really, given that they were effective for what they did already. Arguably they might have had trouble with the units that they're leading though, given that they can't lead Lichguard anymore, and Necron warriors got less good for the entire build around them for big durability thing, given their reanimation is just going to be not quite as potent. The Technomancer lost the option to take the Canoptek control node, so just always has the Canoptek cloak now, though leading raids is a big new role for him. The Psychomancer went up very slightly from 50 to 55 points, but at least it's actually gained some somewhat useful Battleshock rules now. The Nightmare Shroud now makes enemy units test if they've taken any damage at all, similar to Chaos Knights, which can occasionally flip objectives if you get lucky. And his Harbinger rule is a bit more flexible, going off at the start of any phase, and hands out a -1 to the test even if the target's quite far away now. Useful enough for Battleshock utility, could be even more useful if Games Workshop buffs the core mechanic somehow. Otherwise, the Chronomancer still seems very effective. The Plasmancer will really quite like Immortals, and certainly in Canoptek Court. He also got a boost to his mortal wound shooting attack as well. Previously it was a kind of anti-horde one with mortals on 6s per models in the unit. Now it's just a nice simple 4d6, and for each 4+ you deal a mortal wound, which I think is going to be generally more helpful and more powerful. Finally, Illuminor Zeraz got a very generous points cut, going down from 185 to 160. He does have a fairly punchy stat line just in his own right, and gets some pretty interesting buffs for Necron battle line units, worsening or buffing AP by 1. Perhaps particularly nice for Tesla Immortals these days, though it's just quite a handy boost to have in general. He did get the aura ability of that decreased down to 3 inches, so it's more going to be just supporting maybe 1 or 2 squads advancing directly alongside him, but overall I'd still say that he winds up improved given the big points cut. Otherwise, Forge World units are completely unchanged. Perhaps the most interesting ones might be the 3 flavours of Canoptek things in the Canoptek Court. They've not changed in points, but now might have access to full hit rerolls, so I'd say that they're all interesting choices there. Probably going to be a bit underwhelming otherwise though. The Acanthrites might be interesting for a forward deploy unit to rival some flayed ones. Finally we get onto the enhancements, and these are the ones for the Awakened dynasty. The Veil of Darkness with its teleportation still remains 20. The Netherrealm Casket has gone down slightly, down to 20. That was a little bit cheaper than the Hypermaterial Ablator, but it did lose the cover benefit. Now it's just stealth, but I still think stealth for 20 points is absolutely fine. The Phasal Subjugator is the new name for the Sovereign Coronal, and that one's actually gone up slightly from 30 to 35, though I still think that given that it can give +1 to hits to a bunch of units around it, and those things can be serious Necron firepower, like Canoptek units, destroyers, or even monoliths, it's still pretty interesting. Finally, the Enagic Dermal Bond is the new name for the Sempiternal Weave. That's the one that gives you the 4+ Feel No Pain. That one's 15 points up from 10, and still worth it on things like the Catacomb Command Barge if you have one. Maybe a little bit more questionable on infantry unless you're just using it to use up the last few points. Broadly still pretty good though. I feel like all of these remain usable, but maybe a little bit less standout than they were before. For the Annihilation Legion, Eldritch Nightmare is 15 points. That one's the one to battle shock enemies in engagement range. Not great unless Games Workshop changes up the battle shock rules. Eternal Madness is the fights in death one, and that's 25 points. I'd say that's probably too much really for a fight in death on a 4+. It's not the worst rule, but just seems like you're paying quite a bit for it, and the unit might not even die in combat. Ingrained Superiority is a nice cheap 10-point one. Critical wounds for the bearer's unit get an extra AP -1 better, both at range and melee. The damage boost, I'd say, is pretty weak, but at 10 points it's really not much. If you've got a spare Locust Lord leading a unit or a Scorpet Lord leading a unit, I would probably pick this up. Finally though, the really good one is Soulless Reaper. This one's 20 points to prevent units from falling back on a 3+, so really quite a good chance there. That could be catastrophic for enemies that are basically just a gunline army, lock something in combat and prevent your scary destroyers from getting shot, and then also hopefully kill that unit in their turn, ready to charge something at you. Easily the best enhancement, and probably would have been regardless of points cost, to be honest. For the Hypercrypt Legion, the Osteoclave Fulcrum grants you Deep Strike, so really quite nice redeployment with the detachment rule. At 20 points that's absolutely fine, would certainly get taken. Dimensional Overseer gives you +1 to the number of units that can be put into reserve. I was maybe a little bit lukewarm about that one, but given that it's only 10 points, if you think that you have any chance of needing that, I feel like that's pretty reasonable to have on a random character. Arisen Tyrant is a rather nice damage boost, 4 rerolls to hit for a unit that's risen from reserves this turn. Pretty epic for a shooting unit, particularly things like Immortals with a Plasmancer or Locust Destroyers with a Locust Lord, fish for those lethal or sustained 5s and 6s, but it's just quite a good damage boost full stop, and you should be able to make great use of it warping the squad on and off the board each turn. Finally, the Hyperspatial Transfer Node is an auto advance of 6 inches. At 15 points that seems a bit weak. I guess again it could help out with things with the assault keyword, like Immortals with Tesla I guess. I guess it does get you reliability, and that you could use it if you didn't want an Overlord in the unit, maybe a Royal Warden instead for the fall back and shoot option. I felt like the Canoptech Court enhancements were fairly good, and they seem to come at a really quite good points cost as well. The Dimensional Sanctum is just 20 points, and that one grants Infiltrators. That'll absolutely definitely get taken to throw a bunch of wraiths into the enemy's face, or you could have warriors or immortals securing those crucial central objectives for your power matrix nice and early. Really good value there. The Hyperphasic Fulcrum gives you reroll wound rolls of 1 when you're in your power matrix, so stacking damage boosts on damage boosts there, and that one's only 15 points. Again, in my opinion, absolutely well worth it. The Auto Divinator is also great. This one's a 2+ chance to generate a command point whenever your opponent regenerates one. Not going to be relevant in any game, but provided you don't have Imitate the Stormlord on the go, provided you've got a character that can take this, I would certainly pick it up just for the chance to rustle up some CP. If it averages you 1 extra command point per game, it's probably done its job at 15 points. Finally, the Mesodermal Tesla Weave is one that allows you to deal some mortal wounds when the enemy tries to charge you. I did think that this one will probably be cheap, and indeed it is. At just 10 points, again that's fine. Having a small chance to just zap an enemy Terminator to death when it tries to charge you, I think is really quite big. Very nice to have for a unit that's going to be taking central objectives and is quite likely to get charged by something. Overall, a really strong set of enhancements here. I feel like lists could be tempted to run all of these, so you'll have to pick your favourite 3. Finally, we get to the Obeisance Phalanx, the Overlords, Lich Guard and Triarchs one. Honourable Combatant is the one where the enemy loses CP if your character unit slays an enemy character. Really quite situational, but at 10 points could be worth it to throw in if you're not using anything else. Costing the enemy a command point at a critical point could be rather brutal. Unflinching Will gives you precision and anti-infantry 5+ in melee, so that would be devastating wounds on a 5+ for the Overlord weapons. Could have been okay, but at 20 points I feel like that you're not really going to get enough value out of that, not unless you've got nothing better to use. Warrior Noble is -1 to hit in melee. For a frontline squad that's absolutely fine. Seems good for a unit that's trying to hold down a midfield objective like Warriors or Immortals, or some Lich Guard with an Overlord at the head. Finally, and perhaps best, is Eternal Conqueror. Reroll hit rolls against enemy units on objectives for your whole unit. Again, could be a fun way to get big mortar Tesla spam on the go. But it's just a solid damage boost for anything concerned, particularly as you might be getting a +1 to wound from your faction's core rule if you do go all in on stacking the damage boosts. That one's 25 points, so is the most expensive, but still that's a good buffing rule on an already okay buffing character. I feel like that one will be one of the more popular picks. Overall though, a whole bunch of interesting stuff. I feel like there's a fair amount to be positive in those points cost changes. Perhaps real winners are the Necron Catan, which I'm frankly surprised didn't go up, given that they were kind of good already. I feel like we'll be seeing the Void Dragon and the Nightbringer in a whole load of lists going forward. I'm really quite pleased that they dropped Lichguard by as much as they did. They did need to go down, and that's actually more than I expected they'd put them down. At 17 points for that profile, they remain fun. I feel like without the reanimation warriors might still be a little bit unexciting at 10 points. Maybe 9 could have been a little bit better. Let me know what you think of that. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts. I'll hopefully aim to follow this up with a Necrons tier list at some point later in the week, giving a few more thoughts that in context of these points cost, how the units stack up against each other. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like that, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and there'll definitely be a fair bit more for the Necrons coming. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and Keely. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.